I'm Mark Gilbert here. In this video, we're going to be talking about from wholeness to radical wholeness and what exactly that means. You know, in our last video, I discussed the concept of spiritual wholeness and described it in the standpoint that we live in three realms at the same time. We are in a body, we have our mind, and then there is spirit, or the one, the all that is above us. And it's sort of like a three-layer cake, and all three aspects of them are interunited in a divine oneness. And so that finding wholeness is about understanding that unity and bringing all aspects of our life together. And so the ultimate goal of the spiritual path is, or enlightenment, is to understand and to know that oneness at the deepest level of who we are. In that video, I read a couple of quotes from Ken Wilber's latest book, which is entitled Finding a Radical Wholeness, Finding Radical Wholeness. And so what we're going to explore today is a few minutes explaining what does Wilber mean by this radical wholeness and what can it hold for us, and we can learn and glean from it on our own personal spiritual path. Now, when we talk about Ken Wilber, I just have to admit I've been a long-time student of his for probably over 20 years. There's several people and teachers that have come into my life that have been very instrumental in shaping who I am and how I understand life's experiences, and Ken Wilber is one of them. So I first got this book on Audible and was listening to it and found so many quotes and so many things in it that I wanted to reference that I had to stop and go buy the book. Now, whether the book resonates with you or not, that's another thing. But for me, it really did, and I enjoyed the book, and there's a lot of good and wonderful wisdom in there that I'm still picking from the book. But what does he mean by a radical wholeness? Well, he means that there are, we can look at wholeness like I did describe a moment ago, but he wants to parse it out and say there's 5 ways we as human beings can grow and develop develop a sense of wholeness. And those 5 ways he calls waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up. And what does he mean by those? Very briefly, waking up is having a spiritual experience where you have an experience of the divine, God, oneness. You have that non-dual or witness consciousness experience, and it develops you so that you see life in a slightly different way than you did before, maybe in a more bigger way than you did before. The second way, growing up, is really about evolving in our consciousness from many areas of our life, but whatever it is, it's saying we start at one particular level of where we are in an aspect of our life, and that we grow and evolve in it and develop it. Opening up is opening up to the fact that there are multiple intelligences. So when we're growing, not only can we grow cognitively, we can also grow socially and emotionally and spiritually, and any of the multiple intelligences. So opening up is really opening up to the vast areas or array of all the opportunities of life in a way that we can grow in them. Cleaning up is looking at the things that we've buried in ourselves, our shadow aspect, and trying to uncover them so that we can heal them and bring them back into a state of wholeness in our own lives. So it's basically those things that we have buried, maybe through traumas or events in our life, and that it's led to us doing projections onto other people or denial of things that are in our life. Finding out those areas where we have something to heal, bringing it up into conscious awareness, and then healing that. So you're doing shadow work. And the final one is showing up. And what does he mean by showing up? He's recognizing that we as human beings live in multiple perspectives, that we have this perspective of the first person, it's me looking at life and involving with life, but I'm also in relationship with other people or other things. And so there's always a relationship or second person aspect. And then there is also looking out at the world of form and stuff and its. So it's a first person, second person, third person perspective, or in Wilber's work also looking at it from his quadrants, all quadrants level, which is looking not only at our internal life individually and our internal life in relation to others, but our external life with the world in a singular way, and our relationship to the life, broader life externally and in a plural way. So if you're familiar with Wilber's quadrants levels, that might make sense for you. If it doesn't make sense, I do have a video from a few years ago that I'll link in the show description where I give an introduction to Ken Wilber's AQAL model, and it gives a good background on that. He does cover it in the book, but the only thing you really need to know in the moment is that showing up is really about, as you go through life, looking at things not only from your own personal perspective, but looking at it in the perspective of relationships with others and in with the relationship with the external world. So that said, Wilber says radical wholeness is finding ways to develop all 5 of these types of wholeness. He says we can find wholeness in each one of them. We can develop a wholeness by going through and developing each aspect of waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, or showing up. But if we really want to get to what he calls big wholeness or genuine wholeness, which he capitalizes in the book, simply to show them as being that big, and in my mind it means encompassing the divine aspects of them, then you really want to look at all areas of your life and not only have a spiritual experience, but also develop your evolution of your consciousness, also opening you up to developing your multiple intelligences, also looking at healing your shadow, and then looking at different perspectives as you go through all this stuff. If you can take all of that into account, you will get into what Wilber calls a radical wholeness. Now, even though Wilber calls the radical wholeness developing all 5 of these types of wholeness, he dwells or emphasizes in the book 2 types of wholeness that we really need to focus upon. And one of those is the waking up experiences, and the other is the growing up process. Now, let's look at those for just a moment, a little deeper. What does he mean by waking up? Well, as I said a moment ago, it's having a direct experience of the divine. So we go around each day and have states of consciousness where we have our waking state, where we're interacting with life. We go to sleep at night and have dreams, so we have the dream state. We also go to sleep at night and we have deep sleep where we're not dreaming. We're all familiar with these 3 states of consciousness and the experiences of having those as a human being. But he says that beyond those, there are spiritual experiences that we can develop through meditation, contemplation, being in nature, and in other means, basically to have a taste of and experience the divine in oneness. I spoke a little bit about this in the last video on spiritual wholeness. But here, Wilber goes even further and talks about some direct experiences and processes that we can use for developing our waking up experience. Now, waking up is, again, developing the conscious experience in us. It is what he calls knowledge by acquaintance, by the very nature that we have the experience. You know, we can read about experiences of non-duality and the witness consciousness and understand them from an intellectual standpoint. And that's what he calls knowledge by description. Knowledge by description. But the direct experience of something gives us a real understanding of it. It's like I can explain what a déjà vu experience is, but if you actually have a déjà vu experience, that is going to be so totally different and anchored into your consciousness so deeply because you've gone through the experience, you have felt it, and that's so much different than just understanding it conceptually by what it means. So it's sort of like the old statement of focusing on the finger pointing at the moon. The moon is the experience, and sometimes in the finger are the things that point at the process to understand the moon. And if we focus on the understanding, it's the finger, but we actually want the experience, which is the moon. So he's calling us to develop those direct spiritual experiences. Now, in the book, he offers 2 levels of experience. He calls Turiya and Turiya Tita, which from the Veda actually means, Turiya means the 4th type of consciousness, and Turiya Tita means beyond the 4th state of consciousness. Another way of describing these states of consciousness is that Turiya, in my mind, relates to the witness consciousness, the understanding of and processes that we would use to develop a sense of being the witness of what's going on in our lives. An example of that is when we go into meditation and we look out at life and we understand that with everything we're looking at, we are not that thing out there. And we simply understand that within us, within this individual that I am, and I tend to be, circling my hands around my head because that's where we tend to anchor and sense our consciousness being, that is I have this sense of mark that goes around witnessing and seeing this life. Now, when I'm in waking state consciousness, I'm interacting with the world and I forget that I'm a witness. But the witness consciousness state is something that we can develop through meditative techniques where we understand that we are somewhere behind what's going on, that we are not the one that is interacting in this world necessarily, but there is a witness behind our ego consciousness that looks out at life and just sees it for what it is. This actually ties to an old Zen koan, which is talks about seeing the face behind the face. And what he's talking about is the actual physical face that we think of relates to our ego. Our ego looks out at the world, but there is a face that exists behind the face that is the true self of our nature. It's that part of us that is anchored in the divine or God nature that is then looking out at life. So this witness consciousness, or this turiya, is what Wilber writes about and gives some examples of meditations that can develop the state of that witness consciousness. So he says we go through those first to get into that fourth state, and then ultimately that's not where we want to stay. We ultimately want to go into beyond the fourth, the turiyatita state, which basically is a non-dual consciousness. And he offers some examples for doing that as well. Now, in that state of consciousness, what you're actually doing to understand it maybe a little bit intellectually is that you do a meditation that not only gets into the state of the witness consciousness, where you are witnessing everything and recognize that you are not the things that you are looking at and witnessing, but in this fifth state, you are actually recognizing that what is out there is also in you. And so there is no distinction between what you're seeing and experiencing in life and what is within you and your consciousness. And there's a beautiful headless exercise that he borrows from another spiritual teacher from the 20th century that has this headless exercise. You can go out on YouTube and Google the headless exercise, and you'll find examples of these and people leading you through them. But they're basically an exercise where you simply recognize that what is you're perceiving outside of yourself is inside you, and you see it and feel it collapsing into the space where your head is. So that you imagine as you're walking around that you do not have a head, and that what is outside you is also inside you. And so this sense breaks down any kind of duality. So ultimately, these are hard to describe, but if you get the concept of them, what you're trying to do is to move beyond your normal states of consciousness, to have one of these experiences of the witness consciousness, where you're witnessing stuff, and the non-dual consciousness, where everything outside of you is collapsing inside of you, so that you see that you are all one, that you have these experiences, that they directly give you a glimpse and a feeling of the interconnectedness and the unity of this universe in which we live. And so these experiences are what Wilber calls the waking up experience, because we're having one wakes us up to the truth that we are more than this waking state and dream state and deep sleep state. Now, waking up, again, is just one aspect of wholeness. He also says that we need to grow up. Now, in the book, Wilber, he stresses, when he talks about growing up, it's evolving in consciousness. And there's many ways we can do this. It's like in his aspect of opening up to all the multiple intelligences, he collapses his description in the book down to simply describing how we grow through stages of spiritual intelligence, and how we start with an understanding of spirituality and move through stages of spiritual growth to understand spiritual concepts. And as we move through most aspects of spiritual intelligence, we move through different stages of understanding that ultimately at the higher and highest stages, we understand a unity of the universe. We understand that everything is interconnected. We understand that all people are one, and that everything in the life and that we experience in the world is one. And that we understand that the world of the physical world of the earth, the world of our consciousness, and the world of spirit or God are all interconnected in a divine oneness, that there is no duality. Even though we may experience it in these multiple levels, what I described in the last video is that three-layer cake of body, mind, spirit, that actually they're collapsed into a divine unity, and we just experience them in different levels and different realms. Okay, so we can understand that intellectually, and that's one way of us, in my mind, growing spiritually and becoming enlightened, is to understand it intellectually. And the more we understand it intellectually, I think the more that we also want to experience that, which takes us over to the waking up experience. And so we do our spiritual practices and our meditations and things of that nature so that we can wake up, but we also develop our understanding so we can interpret what it is that we're sensing and experiencing in these spiritual experiences. And then bringing them together brings a new level of wholeness into our lives. Now, in this book, Wilber also sort of simplifies his stages of development in spiritual intelligence. He breaks it down into essentially the stages of moving from being egocentric to ethnocentric to being world-centric to being integrated-centric or integrated. What do we mean by those? Egocentric is when I think I'm a separate and only individual and I only care about myself. Ethnocentric is when I start caring about people who are around me, so my sense of care and concern expands to a larger group of those people around me, like my friends, my family, eventually the people who think like me, who may be in my spiritual path with me, or my church with me, or people who are in my state, my country. Eventually we are growing a bigger and bigger circle of people that are in our group. As long as we have an our group and an out group, we're still ethnocentric, but our ethnocentric circle tends to grow upward and upward and upward and include more people. So again, we start with egocentric being an individual caring only about ourselves, and then ethnocentric we start to care about more and more and more and more of other people, until eventually we expand our other to encompass the entire world. That becomes world-centric, where we care about the greatest world of all that is. Integrated-centric is kind of interesting because it's sort of like when we move through the stages of I'm a body, I'm a mind, I'm spirit. Wait a minute, I'm all of them. It's the same thing. We're moving from egocentric, ethnocentric to world-centric. At the integrated level, we integrate all these levels, egocentric, ethnocentric, and world-centric, and see the value and importance of us moving through those levels or stages. When we can get to the integrated level, we are looking back at the levels that we've developed through and recognize that they served us and they're all one. Again, we're moving towards wholeness. The same sort of concept we can see in spiral dynamics, for those of you who study that, and I've got a video on spiral dynamics if you're interested, the link will be below. But spiral dynamics, basically we go through levels of consciousness where we make a leap, where all of a sudden we recognize how all of the prior levels of consciousness served our growth and how they're interrelated in a oneness. Everything that we're looking at says we grow through levels, and one of the higher levels that we access involves a recognition that the path we've been on, the growth that we have done, all of the prior stages are an important aspect of the overall one that is in life. And that's a big understanding for us to take away in our lives. So in summary, in his book, Wilber is pointing out that there are multiple ways in which we are growing and developing, and we need to look at and include all of these ways into our spiritual path. We can't just simply sit on a meditation cushion and meditate and have a waking up experience. That will only take us so far in wholeness. We also have to grow and understand things intellectually. We have to grow in our level of care and concern and our understanding, and integrate all of the paths and development that we can access as human beings in this world. We can taste all the experiences in life and take those things that we're growing through and developing them. Understand our perspective and interactions with others in the world. Understand where we've been harmed and have shadow aspects that we need to heal. Understand the availability of the multiple intelligences that we can develop. Look at all of these in the big picture, and then develop them and involve them all in our spiritual path. So a radical wholeness ultimately is leading to that same spiritual wholeness that I was talking about in the other video. Wilber is simply parsing it down to different aspects of our life, both our lives in the material world, the mental world, and the spiritual world, bringing them together and seeing how we can push them all forward and take ourselves to the highest levels in all that we can be. It's a great way of looking at it, and I hope that by outlining this is giving you some thoughts and food for your own spiritual path and growth. And if any of this sounds interesting to you, I'd encourage you to pick up a copy of Wilber's book and to go through it. If anything, ensure that you're on the spiritual path, that you're not only processing and taking and doing practices that will lead you to experiences of the divine, but also take the steps to grow and evolve in your understanding of the world and the spiritual truths so that you can put them in context and understand them in your mental framework. I hope this has been helpful. I appreciate you spending time with me. Thank you for listening and watching this video.